Welcome to the Softland Central podcast, your home for market entry knowledge and resources. Softland Central is brought to you by Softland Partners, an online marketplace to help you find best fit resources for your market entry. Find them at softlandpartners.com. Hi, everybody. Bill Kenny here with Softland Central, the hub of market entry. So today we have a wonderful episode planned for you. Please help me welcome Trena Blair, who is the founder of FD Global Connections. And Trena, it's delightful to have you. It's your morning. It's my evening. You're in Sydney. I'm in Connecticut. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Bill, and great to be part of your wonderful show. So really looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to have you. And I think the first thing that would be really great to hear, and obviously gives a lot of context to what we're going to talk about, is if we can learn a little bit more about you, a little bit about your background, and also about FD Global Connections. But maybe let's start with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your background.
Sure, delighted to. So my background is corporate. In fact, I lived and worked in New York for a couple of years in corporate, and then was transferred back to Australia. Happily left corporate on a package, and as given my knowledge and experience around launching products in the US when I was living over there, and knowing my way around New York as well, I was then approached by a company director to establish their business in New York. And that was in 2014, and that's where FD Global Connections started.
That's so cool. Wow, what a neat transition. Most people that get a nice package aren't quite as ambitious in terms of what they build, and you've obviously leveraged that very well to build FD Global Connections.
Yeah, this story, it's one of synchronicity, actually, where after I left corporate, I actually took some time out, as everyone does mostly, and I qualified as a company director here in Australia, and I was at a AICD, Australian Institute of Company Director event, and I was sitting next to this person that I'd never met before, and he looked at me and he said, "So what's your pitch?" Now, I'd had about 3 months to figure out what my pitch was. And we only had about 15 seconds because the guest speaker was walking up on stage. And I turned to him and I said, "Payments, travel, lived and worked in New York." That was it. Now, this was a IT development company in the payments expense management business. They'd also developed travel software, and they needed someone to help them set up in New York. It was just one of those perfect moments.
Wow.
Together. It was quite incredible. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. My wife and I often talk. We network a ton, just like you do, and we often talk about because we all have that tension about, do I leave the house or do I not leave the house? Do I go to this event or that event? I'm tired. I don't want to go, and all those negative sort of things. But it's funny, as we talk about it, we've never been disappointed in the events that we've gone to. And it's the hardest part of participating in anything is actually leaving the front door, right? It's
motivation to go. and indeed, my husband, I didn't want to go to that event,
right.
And it was actually the graduation for the RCD, and I thought, graduation, I'm a little bit over that,
Right.
I'm a bit too old to go to graduation events. And, he knew how much I'd worked at it and passed the exams and did all that. And he said, "No, you have to go." I thought, grudgingly, I thought, okay. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah, right. And a business is launched. Well, let's talk about that business. So can you tell us about FD Global Connections? What do you do? What does a customer look like? All those types of things.
Yeah, so we work with businesses to launch internationally, mostly from Australia into the US, although I've mentored US companies coming into Australia as well. And one of the areas, as I was researching the statistics around the success of companies going global, there's about a 70% failure rate. And as I looked into that a little bit more, I figured out one of the reasons for that is the lack of preparation. So, businesses, they jump on a plane, they go and meet some people, and then, oh, we're all good to go. We've got a business in a market overseas.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way. And so what I've done with FD Global is I spend a lot of my time working with clients on preparing them for their global launch. And once we're ready, then we get into the market, and then we set the business up, then we build the networks, or they tap into my network. So we work with small to mid-sized businesses, one-to-one on a consulting basis. And then in late 2016, 2017, I was mentoring a lot of early stage companies, startups, but scale-ups really. So looking for international expansion. And what I felt then was that whilst the SMEs to the mid-sized businesses, they can afford consulting fees and to engage an expert, these smaller scale-ups really didn't have a big budget to do that. So then I created the New York City Immersion Program, which is the ultimate growth hack, as it's been called. And that's where I take a small group of early stage scale-ups into New York for 1 week. So in terms of my client profile, we do look at both of those different segment types. Those SMEs to mid-size, they've got their budget, their capital to be able to launch. They're not looking to raise capital to do that either in Australia or in the US. But then there's those early stage scale-ups, and mostly they're looking to raise capital, but primarily they need customers in the US to be able to raise capital. So that's what the immersion program is about.
That's cool. And so that's really interesting. And you'd said sort of the scale-ups and also some earlier stage companies. Are there particular industries? Are you more focused consumer or B2B, B2G? What are the verticals or breakdown of the best clients look like?
Yeah, so because my background was financial services and travel, when I started the business, that was where I focused. So fintech in Australia is massive, and we have a really strong ecosystem here. So that's where early days I was supporting a lot of businesses, both mid-size and also early stage scale-ups. But then as my brand has grown, as I've had testimonials and case studies, there's been other industries that have reached out to me. And so for the last 6 years, I've worked with a whole variety of different industries, which has been amazing learning for me, but also exciting to bring onto those new industries and businesses. So I've worked with professional service companies, I've worked with arts, creative companies, I've done a lot of work with higher education, I've done work with health tech and med tech. In fact, I've got a big focus on that at the moment. I've also worked with food and beverage. So I've also worked with luxury retail. I launched a luxury retail company into LA on Melrose Place, would you believe?
Very
so, so it's been a whole variety of different industries. There are very specific requirements for most industries, obviously, the regulation and the governance and the risk that goes around that. Obviously, I cannot be across all of that. So I bring experts and partners in to support the businesses with those conversations so that by the time they get to the US market, that they understand the regulatory environment and they've got all that buttoned down before they launch.
Sounds really good. That's it's phenomenal. Now, maybe just one last question on this topic, and that is, with COVID, there is probably a bit of a shift going on in terms of both your business model and also the process of launching. But maybe let's stick to maybe your business model. Have the services been tweaked at all in the last month or two to accommodate the the fact that we can't hop on planes at the moment and do those types of things? But
yeah, absolutely. And yes, in fact, I'm supposed to be in New York right at this moment. So
darn it.
Well, you're close enough, Bill, right?
you're here, right? I'm 2 hours away. You're close.
That's it. So I had 4 trips to New York planned this year with customers. And obviously not able to travel now. But what we're doing is depends on where the stage is that the business is in terms of their launch and their readiness for the US market. So I've got clients that are well on their way in terms of building up that network. We've done the strategic piece of work. We've looked at their business. They're ready to scale. We've had 1 or 2 trips already into New York. So they're actually continuing, and they're doing all that virtually because they've met a lot of the individuals, a lot of the network that they needed to meet for either sales or partnerships and so forth. So they're actually continuing. There are other businesses though that are much earlier stage. And so we've done their strategy, but we've just not had the opportunity to do those one-to-one connections. But they're still looking to grow globally. And so my challenge has been, well, how do I support them with that? And what does that mean for my business in terms of, I can't get on a plane, so how do I do this virtually?
Right.
There are other businesses that were in the middle of capital raise. And, you know, to launch into a global market does take capital, as we all know. But they've really decided just to step back for the minute. They don't have the capital to launch at the moment. But what they're doing is really looking at their processes. They're really looking at their policies and just making sure they've got everything buttoned down. They're looking at their supply chains, which, you know, of course, have been dramatically impacted in almost every industry at the moment. And really making sure that by the time we can travel again, or the time investors are opening up the books again, that they can get back into the game of raising that capital before they launch. So a whole variety, there are 3 different categories, basically, a whole variety of different stages that the businesses are at.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's good to see the adaptability, because obviously that's exactly what entrepreneurship's all about, and finding the goal doesn't change, the path might, I suppose, is that maybe the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you had mentioned just a moment ago that one of the bigger challenges that market entry companies have, or companies that are internationalizing have, is preparation. They're not preparing well. Maybe we could talk through some of the mistakes that companies make. You know, sort of it could be preparation, but maybe there are some other ones that you see that also are really kind of key to their success. But besides preparation, what else would be on that list?
Yeah, so there's a couple of common mistakes that I see, and this is for businesses, regardless of the market that they're going into or whether they're coming into Australia. So first of all, the businesses, they're very enthusiastic about launching internationally, very enthusiastic, very passionate, and it's been a dream and a goal and so forth. And sometimes they get ahead of themselves in terms of what they need to do. And one of the things which they often don't do, or don't do well at all, is doing a readiness assessment on their business. And by that, I mean, they need to be looking right across all aspects of their business. So from their leadership structure to their policies, to their supply chains, to their people capability, their customer support, their marketing and messaging, all those aspects in their business, they need to be assessing and making sure that they are ready. And they have to be really strict on themselves. So if there's an area in the business that's a weakness, it's going to be highlighted if they go global with that weakness in the business. To give you one example, one of my clients, we were doing the readiness assessment for them, and they had inventory. Now, this is an established business, very strong in Australia. And when we looked at their inventory and procurement processes, we identified that the inventory management system they were using was only suitable for Australia. So what we had to do was then look for another inventory management system that was scalable. So they had to go through that process because they were looking to have inventory in the US, and there was no ability for capturing that inventory, pricing, costing, anything in their existing system. So even going deep as inventory systems is important. So that readiness assessment is vitally important. So that's number one. And then I've talked about market entry plan, just having a really robust market entry plan. Some call that a go-to market strategy, which is all about the customer. And what businesses have to really think deeply about is when they first started in their home country. So if you're a scale up in the US and you're established there, if you're looking to come into Australia, you're a startup. Nobody knows you here. And so you really have to go back to those fundamentals in your market strategy. And you go to market strategy around, who are my customers? Where are they? Is this product going to work for them? What's the messaging? What's the culture that I'm working in? What's the language? How do I do business there? What's my distribution strategy? You know, all these elements go into that market entry. So
sounds like the business model canvas. It's just going back to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Fundamentals, right? And I love the canvas model. But I think the key point here is for businesses to think that they are going into a market as a startup. And that's what they've got to get back to, that mindset. And the other piece is, and I alluded to it earlier, which is around, they jump on a plane, they go into the market, they have a few meetings, come away excited, happy, yes, let's go to the next stage, and they think their work's done. You know, they think those contracts are going to come over that email by the time they land, and you know, happy days, we've got a business set up in the global market. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. So having a strong network and building that strong network to forge that path to success is vitally important, and that takes time. So they would be the areas around the mistakes that I see of businesses.
Well, and network's an interesting one. Obviously, not very tangible, but critically important. So, who should be in their network? Who are the key contacts for new businesses entering a market that you would suggest?
Yeah, so there's a journey and pathway around that as well. First of all, you need great advisors. You know, you need people in the market who know the regulatory environment, who can advise you on international tax structures for your business, who advise you on business insurance, who advise you on protecting your IP in that market. So you need a network of professional service companies. And even before you launch, you need to have engaged them, to talk to them, educate yourselves about what it is you're getting yourself into by going into that market. I recommend businesses do that as part of the readiness assessment, actually, that we do. So it's really early stage. And then, of course, you need the potential clients, how you build your sales pipeline, who do you tap into, what networks, or if you're not going to go down that path, do you have an expert on the ground in the market, in your industry, that can represent you? And that actually is becoming a model that's becoming much more popular, given obviously we can't travel at the moment. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit later on. But excuse me. But they're two of the primary networks I think that businesses need to be establishing. Now, the first part of that around your professional services, that's easy, right? As long as you get a referral into a business that's credible, trusted, and experienced in dealing with international companies, that's the easy bit. The challenging bit is building that pipeline for your sales, your network, and your partnership, and vetting those companies, particularly if you're looking to get into a partnership model. So they would be the two areas that I'd be focusing on.
That makes a lot of sense. You know, in what you mentioned about the readiness assessment and the plan, all makes sense, and those are super tangible type items. One of the things that sort of dawns on me that and I'd love your reaction to this, but how important is this is totally intangible, but how important is ego in the process of market entry? We can have the best compass and the best charts, but the captain can still fail, right? And so, how important is ego, would you say, in this process of market entry?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I see it on both sides of the Pacific, and this comes down to cultural differences, which I'm always fascinated by. The approach and the ego, if you like, of Australian founders versus the ego of American founders. It's really fascinating to watch. So in Australia, and I actually do pitch coaching around this, because with Australian business leaders, we tend to be a little bit more relaxed. We tend to be coming across as not as confident. We tend to be a little bit haphazard in terms of, or nervous, I would say, more than haphazard. And when we're in meetings in front of, big banks in New York, I'm always, pushing my clients to be upfront, be confident, and they're kind of going, well, what do you mean? I am being. I go, but not enough.
Right.
And so, in fact, one of the things that we have in Australia is what we call the tall poppy syndrome. And I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but it's actually quite well documented. And it's a really unfortunate syndrome here in Australia with business people particularly. If you are seen to be too successful, you'll get cut down, which is a terrible issue in Australian business, and particularly for business owners who are wanting to go and wanting to be successful internationally. And so when I take my clients into the US, I actually give them coaching around how to step up to the plate in an American way. And when I say to them, okay, you're now in fourth gear, and they're feeling totally overwhelmed and totally out of their comfort zone. And I say, well, now you're in fourth gear, you need to get to fifth gear. And they're just, heads over their head going, oh, I can't do this. This is not a good idea. It's absolutely necessary. And the number of companies that I've been with, particularly on the immersion program when I've done this, at the end of the week that we have in New York, they go, I get it. Thank you so much for that advice. On the flip side, it's even more interesting. So it looks like you know what I'm going to say here, Bill.
I'm guessing. Well, I mean, you're comparing two almost opposite marketplaces. I mean, there's no place in the US and maybe on a par internationally that you could go and have more confidence than New York. So anywhere someone from New York goes is going to be, interesting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do get a lot of Americans obviously come into Australia. I think the US is one of our biggest trading partners and most well established. So we have a great relationship at the political level, which has trickled obviously down into the business environment. And so we do get a lot of Americans coming in, and, they come across as very confident, very sure of themselves, very polished, which I love. In fact, I love it all because it really shows Australian businesses what you need to, how you need to bring your business to a market. And when I'm talking to American companies, we talk about pitching and the cultural difference and so forth. And for me, it's really hard because being confident and great messaging is what I love about America. It's just so positive, encouraging, and I love all that. So for me to try to quell that a little bit with the businesses that come over into Australia is really difficult, but I know they have to do it. And so we just go, okay, you're in fifth gear, just get down to fourth gear.
One less cup of coffee a day.
That's it. So, but yeah, there are some interesting dynamics of the leaders in the different markets.
Yeah, I bet. And I would even think, and part of what caused me to ask the question about ego is even sort of thinking about, I think it takes just to cross an ocean, to enter a new market takes a lot of confidence. And that's a really important attribute. But being able to control that when you get into customer development situations and actually be listening, at least, we've seen, no matter what country somebody's coming from or going to, there tends to be that challenge or, to be, attuned not just with your ears, but your eyes and all of your senses to be able to really understand whether it's a customer relationship, a customer need, staffing, investors, any of the environmental issues that can really help direct a company, but it's and it's I'm not sure that it is endemic to market entry. It seems like, you know, it's a general problem, right? We communication is an enormous issue, but I think it gets amplified when you cross 10,000 miles.
It does. It
Yeah.
does. Actually, it's I was I listened to Adam Grant, the Wharton professor in psychology, and there was a podcast about personality types, and I listened to one on the weekend actually, and he was talking about the best salespeople, and he was saying that whilst and I wasn't prepared to talk about this, so I'm just going to talk, you know, at a high level, but he was saying that whilst it's typically seen that extroverts are the best salespeople, his research apparently shows that that's not the case. Often introverts are good salespeople, but he then went on to say there's another middle group who actually are the best salespeople, and they're the ambiverts, because they know when to be quiet and they know when to talk. And so if you're in a sales situation, if you're an ambivert, you can switch between the two much more effectively than you can to an extrovert to say, well, you have to speak up, or an introvert to say you have to speak up, or versus an extrovert to say, please be quiet. And so I think for your listeners, it would be, you know, Google Adam Grant and the Ambivert podcast. I think it's fascinating, particularly for salespeople, and also particularly in the environment that we're in at the moment, where we're doing lots of webinars as well. So, you know, if you're the one talking all the time, you know you're talking all the time because your picture is up on the screen. So if your picture's always up on the screen, you just need to draw back a little bit and let someone else have a go.
Let some other picture show up.
Yeah, I want to see someone else.
That makes total sense. So we talked about some of the mistakes, the idea of not enough preparation, the readiness assessment, planning, networking, and all that. So what are I guess, how do we overcome these mistakes? What's the plan forward? How does FD Global Connections help with that, and so on?
Yeah, well, we offer market readiness assessments on businesses, which we can do virtually now. We work with businesses on their market entry strategies, their go-to market strategies. Within that, we also look at their budgets. And what I often see is that budgets are way too conservative to launch into a market. So we work with businesses around that. And in terms of building up that network, so, you know, I've been building my network in the US since 2007 when I first lived over there. And particularly in New York, I have the most amazing and gorgeous network. It's deep, it's wide, and amazing people. And so clients engage me, as I said up front, to travel into New York with them to connect them with that network. But obviously now we can't travel. But building up that network, having somebody that has lived and worked in a market that you're looking to access and who has maintained that network is really important. Or having somebody on the ground there that you know, trust and respect with the brand of your business to represent you is even more important, particularly at the moment. So we help businesses with all those different areas. I think, you know, one of my taglines is that we know every business is different, but we know the dream's the same. So, you know, every business has its own MVP, their own client base, but all the founders, all the business owners, and the dream is exactly the same. They just want to be successful in the US or in Australia or in any other market around the globe. But how you get there is the important piece. I've worked with, you know, CEOs that started their business 10, 15, 20 years ago. And one of the things I love to see is the passion, the renewed passion for their business when we're ready to launch into the US and we go, right, let's go. And just the energy that you see from them is quite amazing. That's one of the really great moments that I'm lucky enough to have had many times with clients.
That is exciting. Yeah, that's really, really cool.
Mm.
Um, so, looking at the the mistakes, obviously, it's always good to take the antithesis of that. Are there some examples of companies, and certainly don't have to mention the names, but maybe industry or whatever, that would be good examples of success, and maybe that just all the pieces came together and in the roadmap and they were sort of model launches into the US or into Australia, either one.
Yeah, so there's two that I'd like to share. One I launched into New York, and the one that I launched into Los Angeles on Laura's Place. They're very different businesses. And the first one, and I can name them because it's all now public. So the first one is called Enigma Fit. And they're a fluid intelligence business, and it's all based on behavioural science. So the CEO, very well established and credible and trusted here in Australia, he's a behavioural science. So he works with C-suite and boards to look at the ability to assess their ability to adapt. And it's called fluid intelligence. That's as much as I know about it. But what I can tell you is that I launched Philip and Enigma Fit in 2016, and we went through the workshop, understood their business much more, and as soon as he shared with me what he had worked up, delivered here in Australia over 10 years, I knew immediately who in my network in New York would be attracted to that. So we organised a launch event. It was a C-suite breakfast boardroom event, and I secured, of the 22 I think that attended, I secured about 16 or 18 of those. Senior vice presidents of HR in some of the biggest brands on the planet, and across a variety of industries. So there was luxury retail, there was consulting, there were financial services representatives. And within 3 months of that breakfast, they signed up three of the biggest brands that you could possibly think of in the globe, including one massive consulting company. Now, since then, they've opened the office up in Manhattan. They've just gone strength to strength because companies recognise the value that they bring to their C-suite team and also their boards. And also, particularly at this time, we sometimes see CEOs struggle with these kinds of environments, these black swan events that we're in. What he does is identify what those weaknesses are and works with them on developing those. So that's Enigma Fit. So they're an amazing company.
Yeah, and certainly the early generation of revenue you see as an incredible. I mean, revenue cures a lot of ills, right? But and clearly your network and the pre-work you did must have been incredibly impactful, because obviously you fill a room with high quality decision makers. Generally good things happen. But were there other attributes that made that launch a particular success? Was it, were there attributes of the founder? Were there attributes of, other steps that you took? But, what other maybe things behind the scenes made that particularly, work well? Because it clearly sounds like it was, to use a US baseball term, a home run.
It was, and indeed it was a home run. I think there were a couple of things there. So one was the credibility of Philip as a behavioural scientist. So he founded his model in science, and when you're building something from data up, it adds much more credibility. Second of all, he was speaking to an audience that understood him. These were HR professionals, and they've tried various methodologies around coaching. They've got various psychological testing. We've all done many of them, I'm sure. So they understood the language that he was speaking, which was important. And The other important factor, which was for Philip, but also is for other clients that I work with that I've seen, is they are established brands in Australia and their clients are recognised brands as well in the US. So Enigma Fit had some very strong global brands as clients in Australia. And as we were speaking with those prospects that we were talking to about the event, one of the questions was, well, who are their clients? And we could name many global brands that they were working with here in Australia, and that would pique the interest of those that we were targeting. So yes, there were some features with Philip and Enigma Fit and what they've done that was very attractive to building up the event and for it to be so successful.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, that reference customers, yeah,
Yes.
continue to see as a really important attribute, because yeah, what's your history? How can you prove to me that I'm not taking a risk, I suppose, is the what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know with my own business, Bill, so I've worked with the Australian government, you know, on building out a program for them. I've worked with a number of universities, very high profile international universities here in Australia. So when I go into, you know, I can share, I think I've represented Minnesota Trade Office here in Australia. One of their first questions is, well, have you worked with government before? And I go, well, actually, yes, the Australian government. and it just adds so much credibility to the conversation. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh, that's awesome. So, and you said there was the other company that you helped just recently enter LA.
Yes, absolutely. And it was another of those serendipity moments. So I am going to share, but it's kind of a woman's story. So bear with me. If you don't have facials, you know, you listen to tune out for about 30
I don't have
seconds.
hair even, jeepers.
So the story is, and this was in, I think, 2017. So I was treating myself to a spa and was lying very relaxed having a facial by this wonderful lady called Melanie Grant. And I'm lying there and, you know, trying to get relaxed, and it was the initial conversation about what do you do? And I said, oh, well, I launched Australian businesses into the US. And she stopped and I'm lying there going, where have you gone?
Yeah, right. Hey, my face.
And anyway, she said, okay, we need to talk after this and you need to meet my husband. Oh, okay. So Melanie Grant is the most amazing lady here in Australia. Again, very well established business. They have 2 high-end luxury spas. Mel is Chanel's representative in Australia. She gets flown into Fashion Week in New York and Paris to do all the facials for the models. And I had no idea about any of this, by the way. I was just going for my facial and I was treating myself for a birthday. And as we got talking, her dream was to launch in LA. And so they engaged me. We did a scalability assessment on their business. I did their go-to market. I connected them with those professional service people or advisors, sorry, in the US. And that included a real estate broker because they needed, obviously, a premise for their spa to be available in LA. Now, Mel, being Melanie, wanted Melrose Place. And so they secured a boutique spa on Melrose Place and they opened, I think it was early last year. So they're now based, their 3rd luxury spa, 2 in Australia, 1 in Melrose Place in LA. But that was a good 6-month project with them because they were experienced business people. You know, they'd had 2 spas here in Australia. And whilst they had some experience around scaling, you know, in terms of going from one state to another, going international is a whole other ball game. So they really took their time. They were very strategic, and they've been very successful. So that's the other story.
Well, it seems like the common denominator between those 2 stories, as different as the businesses are, is the credibility of the founder and their, just yeah, I'm sure there are lots of other attributes, their passion and so on, but the credibility, the fact that they had something very proven and very transferable from one market to another.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess, does that ring true?
Absolutely. So they built a trusted and respected brand, and they were both very experienced, in their industry. They were known in their industries, very credible based on the work that they did. So, and again, you take their testimonials, you look at their client base, and you're able to talk about case studies. And once you've got that formula, that combined with a really rigid or robust market entry strategy is a great formula. Yeah.
Were there any other attributes of Mel or Melanie's business that were unique, and you think, or other attributes of she and her husband that made them particularly adept at being able to enter a new market? And going from Australia to the U.S. is, I mean, it's a huge geographic jump. The time zones, all that. It is. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure. But was there something about them in particular that made them more adept at it?
They have an amazing vision, which I'm not able to share, but they've just got this amazing vision for their business, and that has really driven them. And they both love the business. They're so passionate about it, and they, with that so. LA was just, one step towards achieving their ultimate goal. And they knew that if they did that well, that would set them up for going to their next, to achieve the next goal that they were looking to achieve. And so, and Philip actually is the same. So, whilst he was looking to launch into New York, which is what we did, he also has this bigger vision for his company. And that's what they're motivated by. I think they know it's not going to happen overnight. They know that they need the budget. They know that they have to build the runway along the way. And it's not going to happen overnight. So they're very strategic, methodical with the steps that they take. And I think that's why they've both been very successful.
That's really, so that greater vision, really seeing several moves ahead in terms of where they're going, what they're doing.
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So early on, you had talked a little bit about the sort of maybe personality differences between particularly the founders in Australia versus those in the US, or maybe more particularly in New York. And just in terms of whether it's their already being in fifth gear or whatever the case is, but yeah, and they may be in like seventh gear in some cases. But the what are the other differences between entering the Australian market versus the U.S. market? What are the kind of, how else are the markets different?
They're definitely different in terms of complexity. So Australia is very well renowned for being easy to start a business, and it is. We have, single regulatory bodies at the national level. We have a national tax regime, and for business owners I could open a business in 10 minutes, literally. It's very, very simple. And the reporting, back to the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, the legislative environment is relatively simple as well. In the US, it's not as easy as you, I'm sure, understand. And if you talk to any entrepreneurs that have tried to navigate either markets, they just roll their eyes when it comes to setting a business up in the US and the tax state by state, counties, city. I mean, it's just overwhelming. Sure. So I think that's the other massive difference between the two markets is the complexity and the ability to establish a business in the market. One of the other key differences is around sales. So the US, 320 million people, Australia, 25 million people population. And so if you're in fintech in Australia, there are 4 major banks. You know, there's tier 2, tier 3 level banks, but everybody wants to secure one of the 4 major banks for the reason that when we're in New York and we talk about one of the Australian banks, people recognize that. They don't recognize the tier 2 banks. So it comes down to the marquee brands that you have in your portfolio. In the US, you have, I think, 4,000 banks. And so it's in some respects, it's easier to win a business or win a client in the US because by virtue of the mass that's there. Australia is much smaller. And so in Australia, if you've won a bank in Australia, then you've done very, very well. And that just speaks volumes about your ability to engage, collaborate, and win deals. So that would be the other difference by virtue of size of the different markets.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, no, it seems like the what did Winston Churchill say between England and the US, and I think it's probably very similar between Australia and the US, is 2 countries separated by a common language. Yeah, and you know, and I mentioned time zones a little bit ago. You know, how, you know, and it seems like such a simple thing, but you know, the fact that, you know, it's actually almost 9 a.m. for you, it's almost 7 p.m. for me. Having you know, maintaining relationships with an East Coast office from the East Coast of both countries, you know, how much does that sort of go into the formula of figuring out, as you're talking to your clients, but in the formula of where to locate? You know, obviously LA is 3 hours closer to the East Coast of Australia or the, you know, West Coast of the US, but how much is that that distance part of the calculus in terms of what you're deciding?
Yeah, there are many different facets to that. So my going in comment would be, where are your customers based? And that's where you base your business. Now, whether that's East Coast, West Coast, or Midwest, you know,
suck it up, cupcake.
Right, right.
I get it. I get it.
So that's number one. But then time zone does play a factor. Now with San Francisco to Australia, also it's only a 14-hour flight as opposed to a 22, 24-hour flight to the East Coast. A lot of, I would say, early stage scale-ups do tend to look for San Francisco, Silicon Valley, by virtue of time zone access and so forth, and also the ecosystem around tech. So that's a popular destination for Aussie companies, particularly in tech, and those early stage as well, I would say. The companies that are looking to go into New York, of which there are many, because for a lot of business owners, New York is the ultimate, you know, and I'm sure that's the same. Well, I imagine it's the same for many US founders as well.
Sure.
Certainly for a lot of foreign companies, UK, Singapore, Australia, New York's the ultimate. And when I'm talking to businesses about why New York, that's often the underlying reason. If I can make it in New York, I can make it anywhere, literally.
As the song says.
As the song says, right? And then we talk a lot about the time zone. We talk a lot about the commitment that is required to manage an office out of New York. And it actually doesn't faze many of them because at the end of the day, again, it's this big vision that they've got, particularly, and I'm talking more of those mid-sized businesses. They've got this vision and that's where they want to be. They know the effort, they've got the budget, and they'll do what it takes to get there. And so once they've made that mind up, and often they've made that mind up even before they engage me, that's where they want to be. That's where they've decided, and they just need to know how to do it. So, but I will also acknowledge there are other great locations around the US. And, I was speaking with a colleague in Denver yesterday. Great ecosystem there, great education in Denver, great lifestyle, very similar to Australia actually. And so, they're doing some amazing things in Denver. Minnesota, not during winter so much. And I know they'll forgive me for saying that. Yeah. But another great destination, particularly in ag tech, in mining, renewables. It's one of the leading states in the US for renewables. Texas, in fact, Dallas is one of the most popular venues or locations for Australian companies. Because of course we can fly direct there now from Sydney into Dallas, so Houston. So there are lots of different ecosystems around the US now, which is such a great choice for businesses to access the market. Whereas traditionally it was probably the Valley in New York, but now there are so many different opportunities.
Yeah, no, it certainly our economic ecosystems, the scale-up ecosystems are absolutely maturing. Even just a little bit east of us, Boston it's an amazing ecosystem now, and 10 or 15 years ago it wasn't so much, but it's really phenomenal to see how that's flourishing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The medtech and the biotech, I think, in Boston are world class. And I know again there are lots of Australian businesses that are either looking there or have based themselves there. So very popular destination as well.
Cool. So now let's maybe talk a little bit about, I think we've got a lot of the structure in place. So how about navigating the process and working with partners? Because that's often, you had mentioned off the top, sort of finding competent and credible, trustworthy partners as a function of what you support your clients with in terms of helping introduce them into your network. But how does a company navigate the process? And maybe what are some of the questions that they should ask to validate or qualify partners that they're talking to? Because we've seen this as a massive problem. You talk about the 70% failure rate. It must be a decent amount of that failure rate is attributed to making those sort of bad early partnership decisions. I would think, at least in part. But how would you suggest companies navigate that process?
Yeah, so it's always a challenge, isn't it? Now, traditionally, what would happen when a company comes either into Australia or out of Australia into the US, they use the FIFO model, fly in, fly out. Because a lot of companies can't afford to have somebody recruit permanent full-time salesperson on the ground in the market when they first start out. And so what I say to businesses is during normal times when we can fly, your fly in, fly out model will work for about 6 months. And during that time, you should really be targeting, as you would an investor, you've really got to profile those businesses that you're targeting. You need to start looking at your existing client base. Can they refer you to any potential clients in the other market? It's always one of the best ways of getting introductions. And once you've got those introductions, make sure you validate that. Make sure you do your research. One of the things which I often talk to my clients about in terms of getting real insights into businesses is, particularly if they're listed, is go on and look at their latest annual report. There is so much information you can get out of an annual report, or any presentation that they've done recently at the moment on webinars or videos or YouTube or whatever it is. So really do your research so that when you go into those meetings, you're informed. It's not a blind meeting. And that's not only important for businesses that have had a referral into somebody, but it's even more vitally important if it's a cold, you manage to get a meeting with somebody through a cold call. You don't want to waste their time. And you have to establish yourself really, really fast. There was a really interesting YouTube presentation only 2 weeks ago. I think my life has been consumed in podcasts and YouTubes in the last few months. So I'm not referencing them all, but there was a really interesting one which said that, you talk about it takes a minute for a person to make their first impression of you. Well, this YouTube video it takes about 10 seconds, and that's the most important thing at the moment. Is when you're on a webinar with somebody, first introductory meeting, you might have had a few emails, the environment that you're in, the way you're dressed, all of those things are just going to matter even more now than what it did previously, where previously you could walk in, shake hands, what's, the day like, all those casual conversation elements that we have in those meetings, but it's so much more difficult to get that, to read the body language. You don't know the person, therefore you don't know the tone of voice. So making those first impressions, and they say it's now in the first 10 seconds that they will make that impression.
Wow, did I wear the right shirt?
No, wear the right shirt. Yeah, did I put my earrings in?
Exactly.
My lipstick, my glasses,
Well, in 10 seconds, it tells you it must be at least a decent amount is nonverbal. It's got to be a judgment on everything from, the way you're approaching them, and just so many other variables besides that pitch that you might have.
Yeah, even more so important, as I say, because once the screen is gone, that's it. You can't walk out of the meeting room and, thank them again and, look forward to, all those casual conversations at the end of meetings that we've taken for granted so much. So after 6 months, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say and if it doesn't go well, it's a very long 10,000-mile flight home. So
that's exactly right. And then so I say 6 months fly in, fly out. Build the network, but then once you've flown back into your market, it doesn't stop there. You've really got to continue working on those relationships. But then after 6 months, so what happens after that time? What businesses are looking for is commitment. So they'll see you fly in, fly out. They know you're flying in, fly out, or they'll see you on Zoom and the webinars and, see you in a few weeks, whatever it is. What they're looking for is commitment. And a commitment is somebody local that is your representative. And this is where it becomes really challenging for businesses who don't have the budget, as I say, to put somebody on the ground. So they've got to rely on someone in their network that they trust to actually represent them and their brand. If I can just go into a pitch really, really quickly.
Please.
So I've pivoted one of my solutions. So as I said, I normally fly in with businesses. We can't do that now. I've got amazing trusted network of interim business development representatives right across the US. And I'm now connecting businesses into those who will be their representative on the ground. These are salespeople in various industries, and I'm getting inundated at the moment with businesses that need to have that representation. They want to continue growing and building their global vision. And I'm doing more webinars now than I've ever done.
That is great. Well, that's really interesting. So the idea of building a sort of an interim variable cost, probably sales network, so that they can begin getting traction, and then obviously getting to a place where they scale.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so these partners have all got deep networks in the industries that they've come out of. And so they build out the network for you, your sales pipeline. They'll do introductions, they'll attend meetings, they'll do demos. And it overcomes the whole time zone issue as well, because they can do it in their own time. And yes, it's either a retainer on a monthly basis or a sales commission on contracts won. So it's an exciting new service, that FD Global has come out with as a result of the pandemic. We're getting a lot of interest, which is exciting.
Yeah. Well, it certainly gives a lot of flexibility in and it creates a lot less friction in the process, I would imagine, of market entry, which is so critical, because there are so many barriers. Anything that can reduce them is a real positive.
Yeah, and I think, to the point that you made earlier, Bill, which is around the who do you trust? For me, that's such a big piece of my brand, in that I'm bringing businesses into my network that's been established, as I say, for 13 years. And so those that I'm connecting are highly trusted and respected. And so that solves one of those big concerns about, am I reading with the right person? Do they really know what they're doing? What's their experience with customers, and so forth? So it's a good value.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, cool. This hour has gone so fast for me, Trena. I can't tell you. Are there any sort of final thoughts that you want to sort of make sure people know about entering the U.S. market, entering the Australian market? Sort of a big, sort of big rock or big thought you want to kind of make sure gets reinforced?
Yeah, look, there's 4 that I will say. So one, obviously, is be prepared. Do your homework, get an expert involved to help do that independent readiness assessment on your business. Be proactive in building your networks. There are great tools now that we can all build up those networks very easily. Be informed about what is available. Educate yourselves on the market itself, not only in terms of potential clients, but all those regulatory tax elements that you need to be across. And also, if you can, get an insider in the market. So have a local in-market expert who can help you with your growth, even during a pandemic.
That is 4 really good bullets. Those are perfect. So I would imagine we'll have folks that are interested in learning more about FD Global Connections and yourself. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you?
Website www.fdglobal.com.au, or they can email me at trena.blair@fdglobal.com.au, all through the website, or reach out on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook. I must be the only person on the planet that's never been on Facebook.
Yeah, you might be on the adoption curve. You might be a laggard with Facebook.
An outlier, absolutely.
Oh,
but LinkedIn, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to connect and hear their stories.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I wish you a great rest of the day, and certainly much luck in the coming year.
Great, Bill. Thank you. And thanks again for having me on your show. Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
A one-way ticket across the nation, a one-way ticket.